The anatomy of the choke point, environmental determinism, maritime fortification, and the biological imperative of the gate. Chapter 5, The Synthesis, Why Empires Fall. Act 1, The Hook. To understand the profound fragility of human societies, one must first strip away the enduring illusion that technological advancement liberates our species from the physical constraints of the Earth. History demonstrates a counterintuitive truth. As civilizations grow in complexity, scale, and technological sophistication, they do not transcend their environmental limitations. Rather, they become increasingly tethered to highly specific, mathematically unforgiving geographical coordinates. In the modern era, no single coordinate is more determinative of the global economic metabolism than the Strait of Hormuz. A narrow, volatile maritime corridor separating the Arabian Peninsula from the Iranian plateau, the strait measures a mere 21 miles across at its narrowest point. Through this geographic bottleneck flows the absolute lifeblood of contemporary industrial civilization. When we examine the cascading systemic failures triggered by the effective closure of the Strait of Hormuz in March of the year 2026, we are not merely observing a localized geopolitical crisis. We are witnessing the proximate manifestation of an ultimate environmental reality. The physical shape of the planet dictates the limits of human ambition, and the concentration of vital resources through singular maritime gates creates an architecture of inevitable and catastrophic collapse. The proximate trigger for the 2026 crisis began with a sharp and rapid military escalation. In late February of that year, a series of precision military engagements, officially designated as Operation Epic Fury, targeted infrastructure within the Iranian plateau. In immediate retaliation, the Iranian military apparatus did not rely on a conventional, symmetric naval blockade of frigates and destroyers, but instead utilized highly effective, asymmetrical drone strikes against commercial vessels navigating the waters of the Persian Gulf. Within 72 hours of these initial strikes, the global maritime insurance industry responded by withdrawing standard war risk coverage, effectively paralyzing all commercial transit through the waterway. The strait was closed not by a physical wall of steel or concrete, but by the cold, calculated actuarial calculus of risk. The immediate consequence was the abrupt removal of approximately 20 million barrels of crude oil per day from the global market, representing roughly 20% of total worldwide petroleum liquids consumption. However, viewing this monumental event solely through the lens of crude oil prices ignores the much deeper, far more complex ecological dependencies that the Strait of Hormuz facilitates. The first unseen domino to fall in this cascade of systemic failure was the global electrical grid, specifically within the highly industrialized, energy-deficient nations of East Asia. The Persian Gulf is not merely an ocean of crude oil. It is the central, indispensable node for global liquefied natural gas, commonly referred to as LNG. Approximately 20% of the entire global LNG trade relies absolutely on the Strait of Hormuz, with the vast majority originating from Qatar's massive Ras Laffan industrial complex. Unlike crude oil, which can be buffered temporarily by strategic petroleum reserves stored in salt caverns and massive tanks, LNG requires highly specialized, capital-intensive cryogenic infrastructure for both liquefaction at the source and regasification at the destination. This physical requirement dictates that global supply chains lack the elasticity of long-term storage. When the transit of Qatari LNG was halted due to the maritime threat, the impact bypassed the fuel pump and struck directly at the power grids of Japan and South Korea. These advanced nations, lacking sufficient domestic fossil fuel endowments, rely on the Gulf for over 80% of their imported energy needs. Deprived of their primary fuel for baseload electricity generation, these economies faced immediate industrial contraction. They were forced into emergency energy rationing that prioritized vital life support infrastructure over manufacturing, thus halting the production of the advanced semiconductors and consumer electronics upon which the rest of the world heavily relies. Yet the paralysis of the electrical grids was merely the precursor to a far more existential crisis regarding the global food supply. Modern agriculture, which sustains a global population approaching 8 billion humans, is entirely dependent on synthetic fertilizers. The production of these fertilizers is inextricably linked to the availability of natural gas through the energy-intensive Haber-Bosch process. The Persian Gulf region accounts for approximately one-third of the global seaborne trade in fertilizers, serving as the dominant supplier of both urea and ammonia. Furthermore, the Gulf provides nearly half of the global supply of sulfur, a critical byproduct of petroleum refining that is absolutely required to manufacture phosphate fertilizers. When the Strait of Hormuz closed in March 2026, it triggered what agricultural analysts termed a sulfur cascade, instantly paralyzing phosphate production worldwide. Consequently, the price of urea at the major import hub of the port of New Orleans spiked by more than 20% in a matter of weeks, reaching over $650 per ton. This nitrogen shock struck the agricultural sector exactly as farmers in the Northern Hemisphere were preparing for the crucial spring planting season. The resulting crisis perfectly illustrates the concept of ultimate environmental vulnerability. Farmers across the American Midwest, faced with prohibitive input costs for vital nutrients, were forced into a desperate pivot. They altered their historic crop rotations, abandoning nitrogen-intensive staples like corn and winter wheat in favor of less demanding, but substantially lower-yielding, alternatives such as soybeans and pulses. This immediate reduction in aggregate crop yields guaranteed a massive future shortfall in the global grain supply. It demonstrated with brutal clarity how an energy shock rapidly mutates into a fertilizer shock, which inevitably metastasizes into a global food crisis. The populations most acutely affected by this cascade were not the wealthy, insulated nations of the West, but rather the import-dependent societies of South Asia, Sub-Saharan Africa, and the broader Middle East. In these developing economies, food constitutes a massive percentage of household expenditures. Analysts from the Kiel Institute noted that the short-run full closure of the strait caused food prices in Sri Lanka, Pakistan, and India to rise by up to 15%, translating directly into widespread malnutrition, economic devastation, and severe political instability. What began as a localized geopolitical dispute over navigation rights transformed within weeks into a planetary crisis of caloric deficiency. What the 2026 Strait of Hormuz crisis ultimately revealed to the world was the dangerous illusion of modern resilience. We have painstakingly constructed a highly optimized, hyper-efficient global civilization that operates almost exclusively on a just-in-time delivery model. We have done so while remaining completely oblivious to the geographical choke points that make such a precarious system possible in the first place. The intricate, invisible web of globalized trade has not diversified our risk. It has instead concentrated our collective survival upon a few narrow ribbons of seawater. When the flow of energy, petrochemicals, and crop nutrients through the strait was finally severed, the resulting chaos proved that no amount of digital sophistication, satellite surveillance, or financial engineering can overcome the absolute dictates of physical geography. The environment ultimately governs the fates of human societies. A civilization that ignores the vulnerability of its geographic bottlenecks is a civilization that has actively chosen the path to collapse.